Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is 6 o'clock, so we will start tonight's planning meeting. Welcome to the planning meeting. I'm Councillor Pam Posnett, Chair of Planning. In the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, please leave by one of the 6 emergency exits around the sides of the chamber. Please assemble at the far side of the front car park nearest to the park entrance. Officers will be on hand to assist anyone who needs any assistance. Please put your phone to silent during this meeting. We will be using the audio-visual system this evening, and the meeting will also be streamed live on YouTube. Members wishing to speak, please raise your hand if you wish to speak and speak directly into the microphone in front of you. Remember to turn it off once you have finished. All member voting will be by raised hands. I would like to introduce those present this evening. So to my right, we have Councillor Webster, Councillor Brown, Councillor Chandler, Councillor Evans, Councillor Fisher, Councillor Holmes, Councillor Illingworth, Councillor Pritchett, Councillor Smith, and Councillor Wood. We have a team of officers present who are, to my right, our legal advisor, Tom Pickwell, and to my left, our Planning Development Manager, Louise Parker, Senior Planning Officer, Andrew Cunningham, and Senior Planning Officer, Richard Redford. We also have our Democratic Services team present, assisting with the technology and taking the minutes. So there is Sarah Evans and then Helen Ainge. There are no apologies for absence this evening. We are a full turnout. Have any members got any declarations of interest they wish to make? Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I believe I have a prejudicial interest due to the application is actually Beaver Estates, not somebody's solar farms, it's Beaver Estates. And obviously I have an interest with the family farm renting land off Beaver, and the field on Castleview Road, locally known as Stockbecks, that is under my son's occupation anyway. So I will leave the room. Thank you.
Councillor Chandler. Councillor Holmes.
I'm sorry I was a bit late. Has anybody got a pen? Because I seem to have left mine. Oh.
Yeah, you the one Chris lent me.
Sorry to give me one. Thank you.
Tonight's schedule of applications. So planning application 20/01182/FUL. Land east of Jericho Coverlet, Jericho Lane, Barkton Le Vale. I will now hand over to Andrew Cunningham, who is the planning officer who will present this application.
Thank you, Chair. So just as an initial update, since the publication of the report, 24 further letters of objection have been received, raising concerns which have already been considered and addressed in full within the committee extract. Appendix F has also been updated to show the full Historic England response that was received. It's not a revised response, it was just the full response is now being shown. So this application comprises the installation of a solar farm with a 49.9 megawatt output, equivalent of providing energy for approximately 15,000 homes. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So the application site itself, for the location of the panels, covers 8 fields across approximately 74 hectares of agricultural land, on land to the northwest of Barkston Le Vale. It is proposed to be a temporary period for 40 years, with full decommissioning of the panels and restoration of the site, the full details of which are secured by condition 12. Next slide, please. So the plan here shows the relevant construction, the relevant access points to the site, which is indicated by the yellow star in the middle of the map. So construction traffic would be via the green route from the A52 down Sutton Road, In the report, it is referred to as Sutton Lane. However, the Highways Authority have confirmed that this is actually Sutton Road, although it's also acknowledged locally that it's referred to as Main Road. The access for the construction traffic would be temporary, and then once complete, the operational access would be via the red route from Florborough Lane from the west of the site, and that would be used for sort of ongoing repair and maintenance as well. Next slide, please. So this is the layout of the solar panels. They would all face southwards, and there would be a buffer around the entire site of 5 meters, a wildflower buffer of 5 meters, except for the northeastern boundary, where it would be 10 meters. The public right-of-way runs through the sort of the southwest corner of the site, but it wouldn't be diverted or affected by the proposal, and likewise the bridle way to the north and Grantham Canal to the south. Next slide, please. So the solar panels would be spaced apart as sort of shown on that top left drawing there, angled and elevated so as not to avoid sort of overshadowing upon sort of each other. They'd have a height of 2.8 meters with a gap of approximately 0.8 meters at its lowest edge. Stock-proof perimeter fencing is proposed around the entire site as well at a height of 2 meters. And then the section drawing in the sort of the bottom left of that slide shows how it all sort of sits together with the solar panels, the CCTV columns at a height of 3 meters, the fencing, and then the buffer, whether that's 5 meter or 10 meter wildflower to the existing hedgerow. The next slide, please. So the solar farm site is obviously there to the northwest of Barkston, and then the grid connection point lies approximately 3.6 kilometers to the northeast, as required by the sort of the national grid connection. The cable that would be trenched underground would leave the site in the southwestern corner and sort of follow the red line that you can see, which runs to the south of Barkston, the east of Red Mile, and then up to the site on Castle View Road. Members, you'll probably be aware of the current solar farm, which is pending consideration up near the substation site in Musson. This application does not need to be considered in terms of its cumulative effects, as it is still pending consideration. Only sort of solar farms which are either built or consented, but not yet built, can be taken into consideration. Next slide, please. So the grid connection infrastructure, the access would be from Castle View Road, and you can see the section drawing there showing the various inverter cabinets and sort of the cable connection to the existing pylon. These elements are considered to be sort of read as ancillary to the sort of the existing already large-scale pylon that's sited there. And the existing hedgerow in the corner of this field is considered to sort of reduce the visual impacts of this particular part of the proposal. Next slide, please. So this is the aerial view of the site where the solar panels are to be located, looking east towards Belvoir Castle. The development site is not subject to any special landscape designation, for example, area of outstanding natural beauty, nor within any environmental designations. Criteria 10 of policy EN10 of the Melton local plan requires the development not to be located on high quality agricultural land. The land in question at present is located on subgrade 3B and therefore not considered to be best and most versatile land, and therefore accords with this criteria. That assessment, which was submitted by the applicant, has been independently reviewed and externally reviewed and considered to be suitably robust and acceptable in terms of its findings. The next slide, please. So this here is the view from the public footpath. Members, you'll see the handouts hopefully in front of you. of these photos, because they are a little bit hard to see on the presentation. So the top shows the current view of the site looking towards Belvoir Castle, looking eastwards towards Belvoir Castle. And then the bottom photo, which is the second page of your handout, shows the 5-year visual. So the field immediately here is not part of the site. The hedgerow that you can see is to be infilled and strengthened in places, and then the solar panels would be behind that hedgerow, so not easily visible, and also the view towards Belvoir Castle is not considered to be sort of interrupted from this location. The bridleway that runs to the northwest of the site is also proposed to be screened by the extension of the Jericho Covert woodland. So that's one of the initiatives of the landscape management plan that has been submitted. Views of the development from further afield are again considered to be sort of limited as a result of the existing topography and landscape enhancements outlined within page 14 of the committee report. And these are also secured by recommended condition 9. Members should note that condition 9 also requires compliance with the maintenance and ongoing management of the landscape measures that have been put forward. And that ensures that the applicant has, must maintain and implement these accordingly. Biodiversity measures are also secured sort of as part of the landscape measures as well. And these are also secured by condition 23 and set out in the report, thus ensuring that there would be a net gain in biodiversity resulting from this development. Next slide, please. So moving to heritage matters, again, you should hopefully have handouts of this on the desk in front of you. The 3 most significant heritage assets are Belvoir Castle, the registered park and gardens, and the Church of St. Peter and St. Paul in Barkston-le-Vale. All other heritage assets are considered in full on page 20 of the committee report. So the view that you can see here on the left is the current view from the 5th floor of Belvoir Castle itself, showing the current site, where you'll note the sort of the current undulating topography of the land, with the site not easily being visible. And then as such, on the second page of your handout, which is the right-hand picture here, shows sort of the 5-year visual, with only sort of the far eastern portion of the site being only very slightly visible from this element. Views of the development from lower floors within the castle and the park and gardens are considered to be sort of further interrupted and screened due to, in part, sort of the low-lying nature of the development site itself and the intervening landform. The same which can be said about the Church of St. Peter and Paul as well. The impact of the development upon these heritage assets and their setting is considered to be within the category of less than substantial harm, a position that's also been confirmed by Historic England in their response. The harm must be identified and weighed against the public benefits of the scheme, which are set out on page 19 of the report. The public benefits include not only the significant production of renewable energy, which would go towards tackling climate change nationally, but also the proposed biodiversity and landscape enhancements as well. The council itself has declared a climate emergency, which is a material planning consideration in the determination of this application, and further demonstrates the public benefit of renewable energy proposal being significant and would be considered to outweigh the temporary and less than substantial harm identified to the heritage assets. As such, it's recommended the application is permitted subject to conditions.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, we're now over to the committee. Have you got any questions that you would like to ask Andrew at this point, please? Councillor Evans.
Yeah, Andrew, could we go back to slide, I think it was slide 3, where you sort of showed the actual solar panels in cross section, as it were? Keep going there. You said, I think, that they're 2.8 in height, and you said the gap was 0.8 meters. That doesn't look like 2.8 height and 0.8. They should be next to one another almost. Surely that's a completely misleading slide.
Thank you. So the height of the solar panels is 2.8 meters, and then the gap that I was referring to is at the lowest part of the panels from the ground level. The spacing in between the rows is approximately 4 to 5 meters.
Sorry, that's
Okay.
better.
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You'll have to forgive me. Got one or two things I'd like to ask Andrew. I'm still feet and inches and I'm not hectares. Can you just tell me how in acres? Oh, sorry, if you could tell me, I said I'm feet and inches, not acres, not hectares. Can you tell me how many acres it will take, please?
Thank you. Yeah, so it's approximately 183 acres, equivalent
183.
to 74 hectares.
Right, thank you. Right. Now then, you say that it will feed 15,000 houses. Is that right? And where are those houses? And are there any other solar farms anywhere near? Perhaps you probably know. I don't know. I don't know.
So the electricity that would be produced from here would go into the national grid network and then dispersed out. So we can't say.
Could it be anywhere?
It could be, but
it wouldn't benefit the Vale of Beaver.
No, but the climate change in general is sort of a national is in national legislation.
But it wouldn't benefit the Vale of Beaver, not particularly. Right, that's fine. Because you said it is a benefit. You said this is going to be a benefit. What can you tell me how much in agricultural terms this would be losing in the acreage that you're taking, and how much we need to feed people in this country?
Thank you. So effectively, the land that is currently being proposed for the solar farm is in agricultural use. So that would be lost. However, it's worth noting that this is a temporary permission, and the land would be restored at a later date once that permission, once
40
at the end
years.
of that 40 years.
Yeah.
Yes, 40 years. It's been sort of been through a number of case laws where 40 years is considered sort of suitable and acceptable for the modern technology.
We don't have
for
a
solar
green and
farms.
pleasant land, you know, by just leaving it. It actually, a green and pleasant land was done by farmers, and it isn't all 3B land. It is some 3A.
Stick to planning point.
Right, can I just finish? You mentioned the ground floor of Beaver Castle. Can you tell me if you have been upstairs in Beaver Castle, which I have been many times?
I have, yes, myself, but also the visuals that have been provided.
That's
as
all
part
right.
of
That's fine. Thank you.
Andrew, do you wish to respond about the land or?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so it's just, I suppose, just to reiterate that policy EN10 criterion 10 requires that development needs to sort of avoid the highest quality agricultural land, which this would do as part of this this proposal. Being on subgrade 3B land, it wouldn't be the best and most versatile land, and that has been sort of independently reviewed by the external assessor, the conclusions of which confirm that it is 3B land.
Ask who that is, please, because we normally have an agricultural person to come, anything that's agriculture. I mean, I'm only asking these questions. I'm not trying.
So it was Appendix I of the committee.
Yes, I know
report,
that.
and
But
it's
who was the
Reading
assessor?
Reading Agricultural Consultants.
And were they anything to do with the people who have put the solar panels? They're not. Right, thank you very much.
Councillor Evans?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to address something that I know causes confusion for a lot of people in historic England's classifications. They have three classifications: substantial harm, less than substantial harm, and no harm. People misinterpret less than substantial harm, and I spoke to Historic England about this. It means harm, and it can be significant harm. The actual less than substantial harm, when it goes to substantial harm, it means basically altering the building itself. So I wish the members of committee would realise that Historic England, if you read this document in full, and I've spoken to them, are very concerned about this development, and less than substantial harm to them means significant harm to a grade 1 listed building. And you can read in the paragraph the rest of what they say. So don't think less than substantial harm means no harm. It's easy to think that.
I'm assured that all of my members have read the committee report, and they've read it in depth, and some of us more than once. And we've all visited the site.
Yeah, I just want to go to the photographs from Beaver Castle, and I think it's the 5-year photograph, which is showing sort of, if you like, a mock-up of the visible part of the solar farm 5 years in. Just looking at the details at the bottom, it says horizontal field of view 30%. Does that mean that that is showing an arc that is 30 degrees? Is that an arc that is 30 degrees of the whole 360 panorama, if you like? So would I be right in thinking, just eyeing it up, that the visible extent of the solar farm in terms of the panorama is about 8 degrees of arc, roughly, if that's 30?
I think he could hazard a guess, but he couldn't tell you.
Yeah, but roughly.
Totally.
So actually the amount of visibility just in terms of panorama is actually really quite small.
Yes, yeah, effectively. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Pritchett.
Just for clarity, for the anybody in the public gallery or listening in, the Bottesford neighbourhood plan only applies to anything within the Bottesford parish once the cable gets to the Bottesford parish and the substation. The first question is, Andrew, your report mentions climate emergency that's been declared as relevant by Melton Borough Council. Why do we not mention that in housing applications? And the reason I'm asking that is if there's a public interest, as you know, solar panels on houses.
Sorry, Councillor Pritchett, we need to keep the question specific to this application
Okay.
alone rather than others. Thank you.
Okay, fine. I didn't see any mention of a fire risk assessment and how fire would be contained within the site or of spreading. There was a fire last week in Dorset, and there's concern in the industry, and there's a best practice risk management plan. And as I understand it, the construction road is being removed after the construction phase of 6 months. So if you could help me with that one, please.
So that would be for the applicant, obviously, to ensure that they had adequate safety. They do have access via Floorbough Lane for ongoing maintenance and repair as well. That was mentioned. So that was the red route on the presentation. So there is access available to the site.
Yeah, but I didn't see anything in the papers that showed me how the risk of fire to nearby crops, of which could actually, with the southwesterly wind, could only stop at the A52, the dual carriageway. So I've not seen anything that prevents in the papers. I was expecting to see fire prevention and access for emergency services to have been covered by in the application.
So the emergency access would go through Florborough Lane, although there is also, you can sort of access the site down Jericho Lane as well. The criteria that we've got to consider the planning application are based on, are contained within the report and fully considered. as
So
such.
there's no fire risk assessment. You mentioned they can access the site down Jericho Lane from Barkston. I didn't think that was in play over the Canal and Railway Bridge, Jericho Lane in Barkston. I thought that was only used for agricultural vehicles.
That's correct. So the operational access would be via Florborough Lane, Florborough Lane access. But obviously there is pedestrian access down Jericho Lane, and that's where you connect up to the public rights of way.
Thank you. I may come back to the fire bit during the debate section. Thank you. 5.1.107 on page 24. How did you conclude there was a net gain for biodiversity? Was there a methodology, or was it an assumption based on the removal of farmland and the landscape management plan?
So the ecological management plan and the biodiversity survey that was undertaken provided budget sort of calculations within that, sort of looking at the loss of obviously the farmland, but also the introduction of the significant wildflower meadow, the new native woodland as well, that's being proposed to extend onto Jericho Covert, and it's included within that plan, which again is secured by condition 23.
Was there a percentage gain calculation? Because it wasn't in the report.
So there's no formal metric calculation undertaken,
Thank you.
but the county ecology were happy and satisfied with the proposals that were being put forward.
Yeah. They wouldn't deal with the relevance of the local plan and making maximum biodiversity. It's not their role. A point: beware the copy and paste. 5.1.108 on page 24. You copied that a 10-meter strip between the fence and a boundary hedge would be good for skylarks, when people much more experienced than me have pointed out they would prefer more open. It's a very good thing to do, but the relevance for skylarks is actually questioned there. And then my final question, I couldn't see within the report on page 30 for operational access, no mention of a new road across the farmland to the site from Florborough Lane. And the Red Kite LVIA review recommends screening, which isn't in the LEMP.
Thank you. So in terms of the first point regarding the skylarks, though that point has been drawn from the submitted ecological management plan, from which will be part of that plan to be conditioned.
Yeah, what I'm saying, you need to beware copy and pasting unless you know it's accurate. Now the main question is the operational access. I couldn't see in the papers that I had posted out to me clearly a new road across the existing farmland from Florborough Road, or Gypsy Lane as it's called, to access the site and where the site entrance would be, and also any screening, as the Red Kite picked up, that should be screened as well.
So there would be a stone access track connecting the two, so connecting from Florborough Lane to the site access point. There's existing hedgerows along there, and that operational sort of access point would be suitable for sort of the lighter vehicles and 4x4s that are needed to carry on the ongoing maintenance and sort of repair of the site.
Two questions first. Do they need planning permission for that, put a track in?
It's part of this proposal here.
Right. So what about the missing screening, the 8 feet hedge either side of the track?
Of the stone track from Florborough Lane.
Yeah.
So there is the existing hedgerow that's already there.
But it's not very high and it's sparse and you're looking down on it. So all the coloured vehicles will be obviously coming in. So what I'm saying is, I'll come back to that at the debate. You've not, so that's not, the screening's not in the papers at the moment for that then.
There is screening where the public right of way is. So that's where the wildflower meadow is, and then there's a new native hedgerow being proposed there. And that's where the public right of way is on the sort of
I've seen
southwest.
I've seen all that. It's this road I'm talking about now. The answer is no then. The screening's not been sorted yet. Thank you. That's all the questions. Thank you.
Anybody else got Councillor Brown?
Cheers, Andrew. Yeah, I've got three sort of questions. When we consider such things as solar panels, etc., haven't seen too much in around the environmental impact from the disposal of the panels at the end of life, and what consideration is given to that. That's question one. Question two is, I noticed when I was doing my tour of the fields yesterday, that, which I didn't notice on Saturday when I was with Councillor Posnet and Councillor Fisher, that actually Langham Airport, it's on the flight path across, and what considerations be given that if we had a major accident or if a light aircraft went down, what's the risk assessment in which to get emergency vehicles in there and get it out, because obviously you'd be with electrics, etc. That's my second question, which I haven't seen anything about. And my third question is that from a planning policy point of view, what consideration is given, for example, to the Environment Agency's statement in 2015, the guidance issued that 3B land is viable land to grow on, and guidance is that it should be great consideration given before you actually put solar panels in a rural area and that. So there's a little bit of conflict there from one department to what the planning policy is. So they're the three questions I have at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the sort of the reuse and the disposable parts, the applicant has confirmed that they would be able to be sort of reused and recycled elsewhere. So they wouldn't sort of just go into sort of the generic waste. In terms of the flight path, a glint and glare assessment was done as part of the assessment to make sure there was no sort of adverse impacts upon sort of road, rail and aviation as well. The site is also CCTV monitored as well. So obviously if there are emergencies that can be picked up quite quickly, and the access is also available via sort of the operational access in order to access the site. In terms of the 3B land use, it sort of goes back to the fact that the starting point is the development plan. We've got to look at policy EN 10 and criteria 10 in particular, in terms of the not sort of having the proposals on the highest quality agricultural land, and 3B is not considered to be within that best and most versatile land.
Just come back to the flight path issue. So basically, we don't need to consider any, just because the actual site's out in the middle of nowhere. You know, it's basically quite a long distance if something happened. So we don't need to take any consideration whether somebody was blown up, killed, whatever. It's just if it happens, it happens. Yeah, you don't need any plan in place how you would deal with that.
Talking about parachutists from Langara Field.
No, if a light aircraft went, forget about the glare. Let's say it just went down. There must be some sort of plan, like for a fire or anything else. How is that going to be satisfied from a health and safety point of view? Because it has to be a planning consideration. Because if you can't get to it in a period of time, why would you put something in a bit like housing? Why would you build a type of housing if it's going to be a fire hazard if something did happen? Because you have to then build or plan for any eventuality.
So my understanding, it wouldn't be part of the planning consideration, but it's under sort of separate legislation surrounding health and safety rules and regulations. That's where it would fall under, and it's for the applicant as well to ensure.
Could the solicitor give me that legislation, please?
I can't give you any specific legislation. It's obviously the Health and Safety at Work Act. I assume it has to comply with all the building regulations, and the site would have to be fully risk assessed as part of the health and safety policies. I can't give any specific health and safety advice, I'm afraid.
That's, oh, sorry.
Councillor Evans, is it a question or another statement?
This is a question, well, a question on the clan classification, which Ronan has pointed out. There's an article on the 4th of July, which isn't long ago, by our George Eustace, and he makes it very clear, and he states, this is his statement, the guidance, this guidance created a strong presumption against solar farms on best, and this is his statement, and most versatile land, and that is classified in law as grade 3 or above. This is a member of our cabinet saying that. Could you please explain to me how we're getting a different view here from a member of government this month? And he is talking about the fact that solar farms are being put on grade 3B and how he says this should not be happening.
Councillor Evans, sorry, I'm not aware of the article that you refer to. I've not seen it. All I can say is I would imagine that that would not form part of a development plan or any material planning consideration. But without having seen sight of that, I can't really comment other than to say I don't think it's going to form part of the decision making.
I don't want this committee to be misled from government. He's a government minister. He isn't going to make a mistake, I assume.
Unless there's a change to something like the MPPF as a result of that, I don't think it would impact on the planning policy making. That's what we would expect it to do, to filter through to the relevant policies or for something to be issued. But the officers, I don't believe, are aware of anything unless they can tell me otherwise.
Councillor Holmes.
Help our solicitor. It is on the statute book. The grading is from Eustace. It's on the statute book, and it takes time to get through. But it definitely is a statement. I have got it, and many of us have got it, and it is a fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Are there any more questions for Andrew? No? Right. Well, if I can call Councillor Tom Parry, who's a member of Barkston, Plunger and Redmile Parish Council, to take a seat at the table. The face in the middle of the microphone, if you press that and the red light comes on, then you'll find that it's
Like
done.
that?
Thank you. Yeah, and if you sort of lower it just a little bit, because
Yeah.
when you've got them high, it sometimes makes it difficult for us to hear clearly.
Okay.
Thank you. You have 3 minutes, and I'll give you a warning a minute from the end.
Thank you. Good evening. This large-scale industrial development on productive farmland would cause harm to the local economy and landscape, not outweighed by the doubtful public benefit. There are major deficiencies in the submitted application and in the examination of it. Any decision to pass this application would, in our view, be unsound. Unlike Melton's own landscape consultant, you have been to view the site and seen how inaccessible it is. Both Heritage England and Melton's own landscape character assessment described this landscape as sensitive to change, not mildly sensitive as claimed. This land supports local businesses in 2 areas of farming and tourism. The solar farm would not create local jobs, and its impact locally would be negative. The site has major operating drawbacks. The agents have told us that the viability of the solar farm is marginal as a result of its location and nearly 5 miles of cabling required to connect it to the grid. Any operator who takes this site on will be looking to cut costs, and that will mean cutting corners. In the very inadequate consultation process, the parish council sought to gain some assurance on future issues, including environmental matters and access for the inevitable renewal of large pieces of equipment. It was clear that the applicant views this as a can to be kicked down the road. For us, it will mean future attempts to alter the plans and enforcement issues. The application relies upon the lowest possible level of assurance. Important views have been admitted from the LVIA. The transport plan is negligently inadequate and has no answer to questions of future access to the site. No revisions have been made to take account of new evidence of local wildlife or the fact that the land is now being managed ecologically via the Countryside Stewardship Scheme. No assessment has been made of the cumulative impact of this proposal alongside the other existing application for a huge solar farm nearby. Our sensitive rural environment is important to the economy of Melton Borough and the well-being of individuals. Large solar farms are not seen, even by environment activists, as a solution to the climate crisis, and especially not one such as this, which is a pig's ear in the making. There are other options available which would support and enhance our local communities, local
30
economy,
seconds.
and the environment. We urge the committee to view this application just as they would any other for a major industrial development on a remote site in the middle of Melton Borough's rural environment. On this analysis, it fails the required tests of benefits versus harms and should be rejected.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. Has anybody got any questions for Councillor Parry? Councillor Wood?
You just said that there are other options rather than the solar farm. Could you just state what you think those options are in terms of energy production?
Yes, well, for example, I mean, there is a question of, as somebody's already said, a climate emergency has been declared by the council, but this solutions to that could be in the form of solar panels on roofs of public buildings and houses. And also, I understand that this solar farm, if it's built, will take up all of the grid capacity in the area. There are other businesses that are looking to establish solar farms or anaerobic digesters that could feed into that grid, and they would be local community-led businesses, and they will not be able to do this if the solar farm is there. Yeah.
Councillor Evans?
Hi there. Is it true that the parish council has recently adopted the old railway line which runs right beside the solar farm and is trying to open it for public for a footpath bridleway so that it can promote tourism? And this is running right beside the solar farm.
Yeah, that's correct. We've recently taken on a license from Railway Paths Limited for the old railway running from Red Mile through to Plunga, which we intend to create a circular path that would connect it up to Grantham Canal and provide a wildlife path for both equestrian and pedestrian uses. And it would connect our 3 villages in our parish and be a useful amenity for local tourists as well. This is a particularly nice part of the Grantham Canal that is a site of special scientific interest. And unlike other parts of Grantham Canal, it is particularly rural. But clearly, this railway path will run right alongside the solar farm. We also do have some concerns about the intention to lay the cable underneath this railway path. There's already flooding issues there, and we're quite concerned that there could be other issues. Yeah.
I have a follow-up.
A
please.
quick
Yeah.
follow-up.
Obviously, I live in Barkston. I need to ask your view as a parish councillor. Could you describe to this committee the consultation that's taken place by the applicant and how it's obviously we've had COVID, there have been difficulties. For instance, has there been public meetings where the public have been invited? No, we can do it. How much real face-to-face consultation with the residents of the parish have actually happened?
There have been no public meetings at which a representative of the developer or the agent of the developer has been present. As you say, this application first was mooted during lockdown and COVID. The only thing the residents knew about it was some plans that were posted up on lampposts, pinned to lampposts. A brochure was sent through to every resident in Barkstone, but it was actually for a solar farm somewhere down in Sussex or something like that. That was never corrected. The parish council did press the agents to try and hold some kind of meeting, but no meeting was ever held. Eventually, we did get some information boards, which were really the same as you saw at the beginning presentation, which we hosted in the village hub for people to look at. But that was the parish council doing that. And since then, it's the parish council that has really are the only people who've had a chance to engage with the agents. The parish council itself, obviously all our meetings have been open to the public, and this has been on the agenda for nearly all of them. And we have had a couple of other meetings solely for this benefit to talk to the public. And I think we have had what I would call a very adult discussion with the residents of our parish. They understand the requirement for renewable energy, and they would be supportive of alternative smaller developments. But there has been no change to the plans offered, although we've communicated this to the agents, partly because of what I mentioned earlier, which is that the solar farm is marginal in cost because of the large expense of cabling it and so on. And so a smaller development is not possible. The only significant change that has been made to the plans is to the access, to have this 6-month construction access, but there has been no solution to the ongoing
Can you come to the end
ongoing
of what you're saying? Okay,
access issues.
thank
Okay.
you. Did you indicate or?
I did. Councillor Evans has asked the questions about consultation. Just for members to the rest of the committee, if it's okay, Chair. Page 35, there is a statement to say there's a significant level of consultation taking place. So just to point you in that direction. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher.
Just one quick question for point of clarification. On our papers, page 6, 2.7, it mentions that the grid connection is 3.6 kilometres, but you mentioned it was 5 miles away.
Yes. 3.6 kilometres is as the crow flies.
Okay.
If you look at the cabling, it goes an awfully long way further. And we've measured it at about 4.8 miles.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you.
No more questions? Okay, Councillor Parry, thank you very much for your time. Now I'd like to call Mr. Chris Oakes to the table, please. Who's an objector? You will have 3 minutes, Mr. Oakes. I will remind you 30 seconds before the 3 minutes is over. Mr. Noakes, I'm sorry, did I call you Oakes? I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Noakes. Thank you.
Right, hang on. This is on, right. Okay. The applicant's original assessment of transport impacts was based on a plagiarized example of a totally unrepresentative development. That assessment and subsequent variations revealed a distinct lack of understanding for the nature and restrictions of the local road network. The methodologies on traffic generation have been, and I claim remain, inconsistent and unconvincing and do not stand up to scrutiny. At no time has there been any correlation between the estimated traffic and HGV movements and the actual development proposals. Final estimates of construction traffic rely on the original discredited example with contradictory methodology. The suggested number of 1204 HGV movements, in my view, is likely to be at least double or thereabouts, and with significant concentrations in the initial stages. The proposed access off Sutton Road is only available for a maximum of 6 months. It represents the absolute minimum visibility safety criteria based on numbers that have been submitted. Critically, the use of Flawborough Lane for all post-construction purposes is simply not acceptable. It is not even suitable, I believe, for the light vehicles that are suggested. Over 40 years, future requirements for maintenance, repair, replacement, landscaping, livestock will exceed 1 trip per month and surely include some HGVs. This route is totally inadequate for subsequent decommissioning and site restoration, and the condition number 10 requirements can't be fulfilled other than by this route. There is no alternative. The adverse impacts of the sensitive historic landscape should be given great weight. Historic England retains serious reservations about the sheer scale and incongruous nature of the proposal. Less than substantial harm still represents significant harm. The failure to address cumulative impacts seems to be inconsistent with the view taken on the Musson solar farm proposal. If members are persuaded that there are reasonable doubts about the accuracy or reliability of any supporting material, then the grant of planning permission would be based on unsound evidence. Any deficiencies require further examination before a properly informed decision can be made. If members agree that traffic and access arrangements are inadequate and landscape impacts
30
are
seconds.
unacceptable, it would be reasonable for the committee on the balance to reach a decision to refuse as contrary to the various relevant requirements of policies EN1, EN10 and EN13. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Noakes. Any questions, anybody for Mr. Noakes? Mr. Councillor Pritchard.
Along the Florborough Lane, is there a weight restriction?
Florborough Lane comes off of what is called at that stage Plunga Road between Granby and Plunga villages. It can only be approached by weight restrictions at both ends, and it would any traffic for any purposes would have to be consistent with the weight restrictions that serve the Florborough Lane.
What is the weight? Is there a bridge on Florborough Lane? Is there a weight restriction
There's
on Florborough Lane itself?
I'm not sure personally over the weight restriction on any bridge crossing on Florborough Lane or Gypsy Lane as it's called, between the proposed junction with Plunga Road or the site, but that doesn't mean there isn't one.
No. Thank you.
Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chris Noakes. Florborough Lane, it would be helpful because I don't think many of the committee have actually visited it. Is it right to describe it no more than a rutted track with no made up area and often flooded in the winter, completely flooded in the winter?
I would take that view because, is this on? Yeah, I would take that view because I could see that possibly agricultural tractors, possibly scramble bikes that use it regularly, could use it. I wouldn't take my car down there. And I believe in a conversation with the case officer some time ago, although he may wish to clarify that, he told me that he couldn't get his car through, and I can't see how the usual light van of, say, Luton truck or transit van would even make it through very carefully. It's just not suitable.
Thank you, Councillor Pritchard.
Based on your local knowledge, how well do you think a 12-ton fire engine would do going down there in summertime?
With great difficulty. It's barely wide enough in many places to actually take the width of a fire engine, I believe. And I do recall sending through as representations some time ago. It's actually on Street View as a public highway, which it is, as a boat, which I'm sure members are aware of. But it's no better than an old green lane. And I wouldn't see how the perhaps 2-meter wide path through would be possible for emergency purposes.
Councillor Holmes.
There's mention of Granby, but Granby isn't in Melton Borough, is it?
It isn't. The boundary between Melton and Rushcliffe, or Nottingham and Leicestershire as it is, starts just over the canal from Plunga. But the only access to this would have to take in the roads towards Granby, and it's much nearer to Granby, yeah.
Any questions? No. Are there any other questions? No? Well, fine. Thank you very much, Mr. Noakes. I would now like to call Mr. Nick Beddoe, who's from Lighthouse Development Consulting. Good evening. If you just touch the face on the front and the red light will come on, that's fine. You've
Okay.
got 3
Yep.
minutes. I will interrupt you at 30 seconds. Let you
Okay.
know. Thank you.
Thank you. This committee takes place against a backdrop of rising inflation and a looming energy crisis, which is due to plunge households into fuel poverty and threaten local businesses. It is also within the context of another extreme hot weather event, symptomatic of climate change driven by human factors, including greenhouse gas emissions. Melton Borough Council recognised this situation and moved to declare a climate emergency in 2019. They have since set targets for the borough to be carbon neutral by 2050. The proposed development would provide clean power for approximately 15,000 homes at a critical time and would contribute to alleviating future energy price rises. The applicant recognises the competing demand with food production that solar PV projects can create, and as such, the project has been located on lower grade agricultural land in full accordance with planning policy as it stands. The scheme is fully reversible, and the land in and around the panels would be grazed by sheep, preserving an agricultural function. The proposals would also bring about ecological benefits, with a biodiversity net gain being achieved as a result of the proposed enhancements, which include a 6-acre wildflower meadow. The scheme demonstrates that when sited correctly, solar PV projects can tackle climate change, enhance ecology, and improve energy security whilst not impacting upon food production. Members may notice the distance between the point of connection and the main solar farm site. This distance is a direct result of the developer's careful approach to site selection, where site suitability has been prioritised over construction cost. The site has therefore been carefully selected to avoid best agricultural land and to minimise visual impacts of the scheme. Where impacts have been identified, plans have been made to mitigate these, notably through a reduction in scale of the original proposals and the planting of new hedgerow to screen views into the site. At a macro scale, care has also been taken to avoid major landscape designations, nature reserves, and significant historic features in close proximity to the site. The transition to renewable energy involves a decentralization of power generation, from large carbon-intensive generators to more localized clean generators, which are naturally going to be more visible to the public. The planning system supports this transition, applying a presumption in favor of renewable energy proposals, subject to the appropriate management of environmental impacts, which this scheme achieves. The plans have been shaped by feedback received through the planning process. The proposals have been carefully assessed, and it is considered that there would be no unacceptable environmental impacts. There are no standing objections from any technical consultee. Accordingly, the proposals are supported by a robust officer recommendation for approval, which concludes that the application is fully compliant with planning policy, including the development plan and the NPPF. Members are therefore kindly requested to approve the application.
Thank you, Mr. Beddoe. If you can just say there, are there any questions, Councillor?
Good evening. Thank you for that. Just a few questions. Do you have any particular problems in letting the hedge grow up to 9 feet and thickening it up east of the track in to protect, to screen the view from the people of Plunga and Barkston?
Oh, I'm still on. Okay, yeah. So you're talking about the land. Obviously, we have the hedgerow that is to be the new hedgerow alongside the public right of way.
The site's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you see, it's that road. It's that one road in.
Yeah. So you're
You
talking
look
about the
down.
land between the site and Flawborough Lane.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my understanding is that that land is within the applicant's control, which is
Yes.
why we're able to route the
Yeah.
track that way.
Yeah.
And the growing up of hedgerow there is not, problematic in any way, and it could be included within the LEMP, which is still to be approved under condition, whilst we already have the current LEMP that's been
Okay.
submitted.
Thank you very much on that one. the other question I've got is it is regarding in the length. Since the landscape environmental management plan was put in, right, things have developed since 2020. A version was changed in 2021. It upgraded slightly. I would call it a bit unimaginative, and there are a few flaws in it from desk work. I mean, one or two of the things like putting blackthorn in, you're bringing trouble in for doing that sort of thing. But the question on this one is, in May, there was a new, I've got to find it now, a new standard brought out by the solar industry for maximising biodiversity and what you can do within solar farms. Natural Capital Best Practice Guidance on how to increase biodiversity in solar farms, published May 2022 by Solar Energy UK. Do you know that group?
Yeah, Solar Energy UK are sort of a trade representative,
Right.
a body that represent the
You're
industry.
probably 90% there, but do you have a problem in checking your LEMP against that?
No, not at all. The LEMP that we've submitted is prepared by our ecologists at the planning stage, and it is quite commonly the case that when you get to actually agreeing the final document at the discharge of conditions process, you do get into the more sort of fine-grained detail of that, which includes things like precise species mix and things like that. So, you know, and of course, as you say, it's an evolving picture, and with new guidance, best practice coming out. That can certainly be acknowledged.
If you check against your own trade body, and as you say, the species mix, there are, I think, red clover, bird's foot, there are things surviving, I call it, down there on the clay that bakes in summer that's not in your species list, and there are some things for lighter soil. I'll send a note through to the planning officer, but you've got no problem in checking that against your best practice.
Yeah, not at all. And you know, it is often the case that you have kind of local issues or peculiarities that that do need to be acknowledged when you get to preparing the final document. So yeah,
there is a big one here: fire and fire management. You've probably been listening to this now. Where do we go with that one then, in terms of risk assessment and dealing with that?
So I think that Andrew, case officer, had covered it insofar as explaining that the controls over that issue as a safety issue are they're set out in secondary legislation. So as far as the planning application goes, it's a bit like building regs and the relationship with that. So you know, the developer here would have to ensure that it adheres to all of the necessary guidance, and ultimately, in reality, the arbiter here would be the insurers and the funders who would run their due diligence. So they're not going to fund a scheme that doesn't comply with that secondary legislation and for which there would be a perceived risk.
I mean, we do have the risk here. I've got policy EN1 landscape. We've got, you know, farmers could lose thousands of pounds worth of stock of arable if it caught fire, and with the southwest prevailing, it could not stop until the A52 at Bottisford. So there is a significant risk. Your construction road, which would be an easy road, is being taken up, leaving you, and you've got the batteries and everything. So, and it is coming up in the solar industry about best practice risk assessments. Now, is there some wording that could be put in about risk assessments in the condition for the fire and compliance with whatever employer's standard is required?
Yeah, I believe a condition could be added. It would probably be a compliance-related one. My concern over that is that it might just duplicate the existing legislation. The one thing I would say about the way that these developments work is that the performance of the panel. So if you were, let's say, concerned about a wiring issue, fire resulting from that, they're monitored remotely using the technology that reports the performance of the panels on literally down to an individual panel basis. And we've worked quite closely with some of the companies that work in that sector. So if there is an outage or you know, a high voltage problem that occurs, they can quite quickly isolate that and cut it off. So there are already mechanisms in place inherent within the technology to prevent a fire. Albeit I do appreciate, you know, the concerns that you're raising.
Turning the wind round, if it was from the north, it would go towards Plunga. you know, and I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure I'm getting a satisfactory answer here, but I don't know where to go. Whether fellow councillors have got anything to add. I'll end on that one.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you very much for the. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. You know, as the ward member, I've been with you all the way through this. One of the things Chris Noakes brought up, which has been concerning all the way through, is how much experience does your company actually really have of running a solar farm, you know, of this scale, which is going to be in the top 5 in this country?
That's not a planning question, Councillor
Well, it is because, and I know it is because I've looked this up.
Well,
in law.
my legal advice is that it isn't.
Well, it is because we need to know, and the committee needs to know.
Councillor Evans, if you'll just pause for a moment.
If I just ask the agent, I'm not of the view it is a planning question, but if you're happy to answer it anyway, then perhaps that's easiest.
I think that's exactly right. It isn't a material planning consideration, but nevertheless, we do have experience. We've worked on the largest solar farms in the UK, in South Wales, and we've taken them through right from the site selection stage, through the planning process, discharge of conditions, and even through the management of implementation on site, dealing with the construction phase and the kind of issues that can evolve. And that experience, it dates back, so prior to the formation of our current company. As you know, we were previously working at Savills, and really right back to the inception of the kind of solar farm industry, really, which initially was reliant upon government subsidies, and since is no longer the case. So indeed, this solar farm is not a subsidy-led scheme.
Carry on from that. You said a reduction in scale. I've been with you all the way through since the start.
Yep.
It's always been 200 acres or thereabouts. It's not reduced in scale that anybody I know here is aware of. So why are you saying that now?
No, it has. So the area that is now proposed for wildflower planting, you may recall that was initially to be panelled. And if you went back to our original plans that were on the page, that was shown as panelled, and we'd ran a pre-application engagement. Those plans were posted onto the website, and then we kind of treated the footpath differently, where we had the stone track running up, bisects the wildflower planting meadow, wildflower meadow, comes up to the new hedgerow, and then enters the site beyond the stockproof fence. So it's that area in particular that is, represents the reduction in scale.
Ask a follow-up to that. I mean, the parish council made a fairly serious accusation, really, that your company has never set up a meeting or been involved in you're offered the chance to talk to residents to address their concerns, i.e. extensive consultations, which is in AN 10, and it's something that the Melton Borough Council is duty bound to do in such schemes. Were you not encouraged by the Borough Council to do this? And if so, why have our residents never had the chance to meet you?
As you know, when the scheme was first conceived and we were in the lockdown period, we did adapt quite quickly, I believe, to the sort of virtual consultation. We ran the project website. We still attended the site. We put the site notices up. We ran consultation through the various parish councils. And my understanding from those virtual meetings is that the invites were extended to members of the public. And so I believe that the kind of conduit that the parish councils offered to the public, which, whilst unusual, was probably at that time quite a sensible way of going about it. Not being able to run a public exhibition with many people in the physical space that we would normally do. My belief was that represented a very, good and effective way of doing it. And when we actually looked at the number of hits on our website, they far exceeded the numbers that we would have had on any kind of public consultation in person that we would otherwise have run at a village hall. As was explained earlier, we also did prepare display boards that were sent to be put up in the parish council's the parish hall, the village hall. And they were left in situ for people to come and view as they please, with reference to the website and the contact details that were provided on that website. So I believe that that element of the policy, that criteria, has been robustly satisfied. In particular, noting the constraints and the pressures that we were under, particularly whilst the plans were initially under consideration and following the period of submission.
one last follow question. It was mentioned by the various people, I think mainly the parish. The maintenance of these solar farms can involve, and I know one of our residents pointed this out, can require heavy lifting. The inverters in particular quite often can go wrong. They're heavy, need a crane usually to get them onto a big lorry. In 6 months' time, you will have nothing apart from Floorborough Lane, which is a boat, a poorly maintained boat, which often floods in the winter completely. I've seen it completely underwater. How do you maintain, how are you going to possibly get that inverter off the site and a new one on via Floorborough Lane?
Okay, so I think, yeah, you're talking about like a kind of extreme event where an inverter needs to be replaced during a flood period, is that?
No, I mean, inverters are one of the most common, I'm told, to fail within a year. They quite confidently fail. You will need to get it off site and replace it with a new one. That involves a crane, I'm told, and a heavy goods vehicle. How will you get it onto the site and off of the site?
Okay, so that I'm to be perfectly frank, I'm not sure that situation really chimes with my understanding of how often an inverter would need to be replaced on an operational solar farm site. I've not seen it happen. Haven't had to deal with that, despite being kind of involved with many of the owner operators of these schemes, which have since been constructed now for a number of years. Floorborough Lane is an adopted highway. I appreciate it's not the best quality, and we're obviously using an alternative access for the construction period. The plans that we've put forward and the estimates of the types of vehicles that will be required are based on our experience. The proposed access arrangements have been assessed by the council's highway authority, and they're satisfied with both the numbers and the arrangements that are in place there. The planning test here is set out in the NPPF that it ought to be can only be refused if there is a severe impact upon the local highway network. That's not been the case here, and so my understanding and my belief strongly here is that it's a policy compliant scheme in that regard.
Thank you. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. It's just information, really. Obviously, you have worked for this company for a long time, and you say that sheep can graze underneath. Yeah, I'm just asking a question. Yeah, right. And you say that sheep graze underneath. How long is it that there wouldn't be any grass, any decent grass there? Do you know? I mean, I don't, so I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, sure. So from experience, obviously there's a period under the construction phase where it can't be, it's taken out of agricultural use. The 0.8 meters is to the lowest height of the panels, and that's quite deliberate. It allows livestock, sheep, to pass underneath and provides them some shading. And actually, I don't know if you have visited perhaps an operational solar farm, they are becoming more visible these days. But if you attend, so you will see that grass can establish even under the panels where they're in the shade, and certainly under certain conditions, it's actually favourable. When we have kind of weather like we've had recently, the shade can be beneficial. So the stocking densities that we typically see at about 60% if there wasn't the infrastructure on there. But the grass quickly develops after it's been sown, and it actually represents a pretty sensible land use for the landowner, because it's essentially another revenue stream for them. The land is there, it can be farmed, so why not graze the land?
So if you had sheep on the land, you couldn't possibly have it in the winter because they got foot rot, wouldn't they? Because obviously we're looking here at how wet it is. They wouldn't be able to be on there, would they?
I don't know the answer to that question. That's, I suppose that's an agricultural kind of query. The one thing I would say is that it's fully the intention to graze the land. That is the landowner's intention. It's not a material planning consideration. So ostensibly the use is as a solar farm development. But it happens, sheep do graze solar farms, and as I said, it represents a sensible use of the land alongside the power generation.
I was just concerned about the water. But obviously, we've looked at these, and this was we could do with the water now, couldn't we?
Well, yeah.
But this one here is obviously, that one is very, oh, not mine, it isn't. It's very, very wet.
Mhm.
And then you were going to put ditches or something, aren't you? Little ditches all over the place. Not having, well, it says so. It said that I'm reading about it here, and you're actually putting some sort of water channels or something, aren't you?
No, that's not quite correct.
Here, I mean,
don't
probably
know.
I'm getting it wrong then, sorry.
Yeah, no. So what we really try and do is with the panels. So where you have an array, there might be 3 panels in a row. So we leave a gap. It's approximately 1-2 centimeters. So it's a small gap, but it's enough that the rainfall that falls onto the arrays can disperse evenly. So what we ultimately want to do is mimic a greenfield drainage response, so that we don't kind of leave some areas that are, kind of fully covered, and where or areas where sheet flow across the full 3 panels might result in rutting at the very bottom edge of the arrays. So the proposals have been assessed by the council's drainage officer, and they're happy with that. But coming back to your point about the agricultural use and the drainage of the site, essentially it allows the grassland to establish. Obviously, it's currently in arable use, and so it will be subject to some compaction, and so the kind of puddles and kind of water sitting on surface water that we see there, I wouldn't necessarily expect it to appear quite like that once the panels are in situ. It's a different land use, a different profile. So yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Pritchett.
I think it's worth saying that the removal of the proposed panels south of the footpath does allow you to have extremely good views of the church, and it helps in that respect. It's a very pleasant view to turn around down there where the meadow will be, and to look round and have some space before the panels, looking back at the church and Stavern Woods.
Thank you, Councillor Pritchett. Councillor Evans.
You've seen the pictures and you're right. There is this, I've seen it in the winter, flooding. This is a flood 1 zone, so it floods in the winter often. And the one thing, having read much about solar farms, is the one thing the industry recognizes: the change over to a solar panel increases flooding. And it makes it very, very clear in their documentation, anything that's in a flood zone will get worse unless there are significant, and that's the word they use in drainage, enhancements on the land. In other words, if you leave it as it is, it will go from flood 1 to probably flood 2, because the whole area in winter, I've seen it, is like a lake. So what are you going to do to actually stop it becoming impassable on the footpath? And it will be, and impassable for any vehicles.
Yeah, that's not really my understanding of the situation. The kind of the vegetation growth beneath the panels can actually in itself reduce the kind of the flood risk. You're taking it out of an arable land use. Alongside the footpath, specifically, as I say, we have the 6 acres of wildflower planting. And, as I explained in terms of the components themselves, they allow drainage between the gaps of the panels. The proposals have been assessed by the council's drainage officer, and they haven't reached that conclusion.
So I come back, I'm really not happy here, because I can show you documentation by the industry, and it makes it very, very clear. And the scientific evidence is everywhere. There have been researchers on this. If you change it over from, the question is, why are you denying what everybody in the industry has agreed, including I've seen 10 articles in the last month on it, saying that if you put it on a flood risk zone, it will get worse. And everybody agrees, even people who are developers like you of solar panel farms.
It is a difference of opinion. I don't really know what else to say. Our drainage consultants believe they're net beneficial. You look at the use profile and the change. It may be under certain circumstances. I don't know that might be the case, but I simply don't agree with that assertion.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions for Mr. Beddoe from the panel? No questions from you, Andrew? No. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. Right. We now, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, just having listened to the speakers there, I thought I'd try and pick up on a few points that were discussed. So the site, the entirety of the site is in flood zone 1. There is no sort of requirement for a site selection process to be undertaken, only if it's in flood zone 2 or 3. The drainage strategy that they have provided has again been sort of considered acceptable by both the Environment Agency and the lead local flood authority. With respect to sort of the highway matters that were raised and sort of the transport movements, especially around construction traffic. So the applicant has provided a worst case scenario, which again, the temporary access from Sutton Road would be considered suitable to accommodate. And again, that's been thoroughly reviewed by the Highways Authority as part of their number of consultations that they had as being acceptable. With respect to sort of the views, during the course of the application, there were additional sort of viewpoints provided and considered as well as part of sort of the assessment of the application, including one from the Grantham Canal towpath, and that's within the documentation that's been submitted. In terms of the consultation process, so again, the full consultation has been undertaken as been required. A number of site notices being placed at the site, in the press notice as well, and not only the parish council where the site is, but all the adjoining parish councils have been consulted as well, and subsequently reconsulted when there was the revisions and sort of iterations to the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Right, we've heard the speakers, we've had Andrew come back on a few points, so it's now open to debate. But before we start the debate, I would just like to inform Councillor Evans, because I don't want people here tonight and people listening in think that everybody on the planning committee has ignored Floorborough Lane, because I can assure you that they haven't. And some of us have visited the area more than once. So, Councillor Holmes.
It was just a matter of information. Have we notified Rushcliffe Council?
Yes, they were consulted as part of the application.
Right, that's all I wanted to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So as I said, we're open to debate. So Councillor Pritchett.
Thank you. Andrew, did you note the applicant's agreement to the screening, the raising of the hedge height along that included in there, and that the length will be checked against current standards for reasonableness? I wouldn't want them to be put to undue expense, which I don't think any of it is. I've listened to Floorborough Lane. What they would like to do, I'd ask the question, is it possible to protect the use of Jericho Lane out of Barkston? In other words, if Floorborough Lane becomes a problem, the traffic doesn't divert through Barkston. Is there any way of protecting that through any conditions agreed with the highways?
So condition 13 requires that the site must be accessed in accordance with the route shown on the plan, which was on the screen earlier. So that would require the routing to go down Floorborough Lane.
Thank you.
Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 points. You've heard me say it before, but I was disappointed in the contradictory nature of Historic England report, which leads you to believe that they think there is certainly a significant damage, but their words are less than substantial. But later on in either that report or another one that I've read associated with it, I can't quite recall, the point is made less than substantial doesn't mean little or no. We're only talking words here. It's a pity there isn't a scale of words like medium or significant, but less than substantial doesn't mean you dismiss it. It probably should have been a question, but I'll ask at 5.1.166, where it refers to decommissioning, there's no mention of removing the cable, the underground cable. Does that mean it's just going to get left there under the ground?
Bedo's shaking his head.
It isn't specifically mentioned. It mentions panels, it mentions structures, doesn't mention the cable. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lingwood, thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Just get the debate going. I think we clearly have an application that's in front of us, which is not only controversial, but obviously it's going to ask some challenging questions of us as members in deciding policy one way or another. And we've got two. I want to break into two elements, and then colleagues can come in on this. Is that we've got the challenge and the argument that this is low grade land. It's in a good site, and the benefits of having solar energy down there will outweigh any negatives, and that's basically one view, and that's laid out in the report as well. And one can look at that as being on face value as being something that's worthy of taking forward, etc. And it's quite clear the argument for that as well. So that's what we have to weigh up against what else is going to happen in the area. And then there's obviously the negative stuff and the questions that I sort of still have. And I get the benefits. I get it's going to put 15,000 houses in or supply to 15,000 houses, etc. With that there, I am a little bit dubious around the fact, the connection and the things are going up in Bottesford in another borough, but obviously we'll make a decision on this application, its own merits, etc. But then we go on to stuff like, EN1, EN10, EN13. You can argue the other way, the detriment that this could make to the environment. I don't know enough about. I have read about the solar panels stuff. I'm not going to get into that. I've seen where the slave labor is used to manufacture them, and the metals, etc., and the disposal. But there's probably more people that's more educated than what I am on that respect. So I'll stick to what I know, and that's also as well is that we're putting something in an area that we want to become an area of outstanding natural beauty, and that's what we have to weigh up. And with that, what's the impact? I haven't seen anything in the report on the impact to EC8, any impact that maybe on tourism, etc. Any impact on local businesses that may come from that, because it's not just about the business that's situated, it's the ancillary stuff, walks and events and stuff like that there, where it might put people off coming into the into the Vale, etc. And we've got an absolutely lovely, when you look over the Vale of Beaver, it's absolutely picturesque. And is this going to be detrimental to that part of the Vale? And then what comes after that, which is a separate issue. I haven't heard anything in the report that the fire service has been consulted. I do have concerns about the light aircraft, etc. On that, and also the weight limits on the roads and the bridges isn't clear to me. I've got a solar farm in my ward up at Ragdale, and I see the 40-footers up there every now and again taking stuff in and out. So is that going to? Sorry, we'll get. All right. So they're the sort of questions that we have to weigh up. And at the moment, I'm not saying where we've answered the questions in enough detail at this moment in time, or there's been enough debate yet to say actually, this is something that we can really put a stamp on and approve. I think I'd need to see a little bit more information through the debate. So I'm just going to start there to get things open, get the debate flowing, and let's see how things progress.
Councillor Lingwood.
Yes, my colleague is quite right. The bottom line is we're weighing up benefits against harm. I find it very frustrating and almost to the point of considering it unacceptable that an area of land such as that we as a borough value and see as a valuable tourist asset being virtually sacrificed to feed 15,000 homes, goodness only knows where. If there were an immediate tangible gain to the borough, I might feel different. But once it's fed into that national grid, it's gone. Yes, 15,000 homes will benefit. And I know we've got to think nationally, even globally, but there's no gain to the borough of Melton in this. And that disappoints me greatly and is having an effect on my opinion of it. So there you go.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'm finding it very difficult at the minute to understand. That's wrong. I understand where people are coming from, but are we really, really, really putting a building ahead of the futures, like the futures of our children, grandchildren, whatever? You know, this summer is just a taste of what's to come. If we don't do something about it now, what's going to happen to your grandkids, great grandkids? You know, like this energy crisis, it's nothing compared to what's going to happen in 10, 15 years time if we don't book our ideas up. You know, NIMBYism exists everywhere, but that's not a reason to refuse something like this. You know, we've got to stop being selfish. Yeah, those 15 homes might not be in the Melton Borough, but that's still going to have a positive impact on the country as a whole, on the world as a whole. You know, you've got to start somewhere, small steps. So yeah, I'm quite passionate about this, but I'll continue to listen.
I can tell, Councillor Smith. Councillor Ward.
Yeah, just two comments at this point. First of all, I've just spent 3 minutes on the internet looking at Google Scholar and more generally, and I've already found 4 references to demonstrate that solar farms don't actually increase flooding risk. So I think there is evidence both ways on that one. Secondly, yeah, it's true that production from this wouldn't give 15,000 local houses electricity, but it goes into the national grid. So it actually helps everybody to some degree. I was at St Abbs Head last week looking over the nuclear power station 20 miles north of there. I doubt the people at St Abbs Head were sitting there saying, well, actually, the reason that we don't want a nuclear power station is because the whole of that electricity isn't coming to us. We have to think about it being a national network. And if everybody at local level, for understandable reasons, I'm not trying to belittle those reasons, but if everybody at individual local level says, no, it's not going to help us locally, then actually we all lose out nationally. And given that, you know, in 15, 18 months time on this occasion, the price of gas may actually begin to go down a bit. In 10 or 20 years time, when we've gone over peak oil, when we're losing the amount of gas generally, it may not be a war that starts cutting our supply. It will happen naturally, that there just isn't as much in terms of natural resource. What are we going to do then? Are we going to then still be making the same arguments about why at a local level we shouldn't actually be involved in supplying a greener amount of energy that, yes, may have a minimal effect locally, but if it's across the piece nationally in a number of places, actually it helps everybody.
Just to say, I do take people when they put the hand up, so you need to keep giving me nasty looks because you think I've ignored you. So Councillor Pritchett, and then it'll be Councillor Illing.
Thank you very much, Chair. I probably get my electricity from renewables in Lincolnshire, And I do believe, unless they've gone bust recently, you can actually choose to have a supplier that only sources renewables from all over the place. The big issue that I've had with this, it landed on my desk last Friday, the papers. No decent photographs or visuals, first of all, and I don't think tonight's actually do the issue justice. I made many visits to around the area for many visual points. I went into the report, of which I'm retired and I've had time to do, fortunately, not been on holiday. Some people are at work and doing various things. And then we didn't have an organised site visit where we all went out to 15 or 20 viewing points. And mainly the issue I've got is about the consistency and the strength of a decision in the format that the report was produced in. And there has been reference to this I'll mention it in the Red Kite landscape visual impact assessment scrutiny they did. In that we've got some information reference to papers, and then the officer's conclusion. We haven't been through all the relevant local plan paragraphs, and this is what the consultants Red Kite did said. The information needs to be put and analysed against the local plan paragraphs, right through from the vision, EN1, EC8, EN2, EN3, EN6, EN8, EN10, EN30, the facts of the situation, reference to documents, and a conclusion. And I'm concerned about giving a decision justice one way or the other, and also setting something down to compare and some sort of methodology when we go forward to others. And I've had to go through that sort of a process now. So that's something that's concerned me, actually. In other words, that you going forward.
Are there any more points that people wish to make?
I'm not a NIMBY, but I'm well aware that we sit here drinking water that probably falls on Wales, and there are some people in Wales who that rests uncomfortable with. I was merely trying to make the point that the bottom line is the balancing and the weighing of things up, and some people will attach more importance to one aspect than another. And I just wanted that to be known as, a view. I'm disappointed there's no local benefit. That's all. So, please don't consider me to be a NIMBY.
Thank you. Can you hold that, Councillor Smith? Because I'm just going to call a 5-minute natural break, comfort break. So 5 minutes we've had a lot of information thrown at us tonight. There's lots of questions been asked. So let's just have a 5-minute comfort break.
If I can just ask members to refrain from sort of entering into any dialogue or discussion during this time whilst we're not in the debate, that'd be very much appreciated. Good idea.
Councillor Evans, can you come this way, please? take a seat again and resume the meeting. Thank you. Councillor Smith, I don't know whether you were able to hold that thought, but you were the next speaker.
It'll be somewhere in here. Can I have a couple of minutes?
Anybody else got anything that they wish to say? Councillor Evans?
I will try my best considering the situation I find myself in. I wish the committee consider the fact that there was a High Court ruling in 2016, judgment on Forge Field and also Barnwell Manor, an important listed building. And the judge on this is an inspector. The inspector on appeal approved it. It went to High Court. And he said, any development that will harm a listed building or its setting, that harm alone gives rise to a strong presumption against the granting of planning permission. Even negligible harm means it engages paragraph 193 and 196 of NPPF, which requires the public benefits must be weighed against the harm. There is significant harm here. This is a very, very remote rural location. When you stand there, you can see nothing modern anywhere. There is nothing modern. There's a derelict barn, you know it. There's a listed hut, 2 listed spas you can see, and Beaver Castle. And it is, let's be honest, English heritage in their, no, historic England in their statement, make condemning statements, very condemning. This landscape in the application is located historically important. Yes, our MP is trying to make it an AONB. Beaver Castle stands for beautiful views. This will detriment, according to Historic England, that beautiful view. I understand the views of some of the councillors here that we need energy, but just like wind farms, and we went through this process when the wind farms became very popular, we have sections in our local plan that say for a wind farm, there must be public support. We have got 250 people, most of them my residents, who have said no, who have not been properly consulted, have not been seen the applicant face to face. That concerns me greatly. We asked, I know for a fact, we asked the applicant 3 times to hold a public meeting. 3 times we got no response. This is time for this committee to look at it very carefully. And I know, as one of the councillors said, it's just an old building, but this is 40 years. This isn't a year, this isn't 2 years, this is 40 years. And we will have no choice but to be there for 40 years. Most of us, maybe one of us here, won't be alive by the end of that. That's how long this is. And I think the benefits do not outweigh the situation at all, because there are so many things. This is, first of all, SS2. This is in open countryside. We as a council say all kinds of things about open countryside, which is open countryside outside developments identified to the service centres and those villages identified as rural health will be restricted to that which is necessary and appropriate in open countryside. This is saying, as a council, if this goes through, we consider solar farms of this magnitude. This is a magnitude the size of Bottisford. You can look on the map and say that is acceptable, and it will, according to Historic England, set a precedent, and they know about these things. They've been dealing with them up and down the countryside. And on EM1, it says landscape, the character of the borough's construct will be conserved and where possible enhanced by ensuring new development is sensitive to its landscape and seeks where possible to enhance the distinctive qualities of the landscape area. If you can tell me that a big solar farm of over nearly 200 acres in the middle of a rural remote location, crisscrossed by footpaths, which residents and tourists enjoy, is going to enhance this landscape with fences, 2-meter fences, CCTV all over the place. Go to Alston, you'll see what happens 10 years on from these developments. It becomes a desert with industrial size area. Even the Secretary of State has said things like, and I do really think we have to very carefully think, because he said, and I've got a huge article here, he considers 3B to be versatile, most versatile land. So there's something going wrong here if he considers that and someone else doesn't, because he's should know. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Evans. I'm not sure what the case law was that you're referring to. A quick internet search, though, for the Bramwell Manor appeal looks like it might be a wind farm appeal rather than solar, so it is slightly different. My legal advice, though, is in terms of the application of the law, is it's the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990. And that requires you, when making decisions like this, to have special regard to the desirability of preserving listed buildings or their setting or any features of special architectural or historic interest which they possess. There's obviously the other balancing act that we've already spoken about tonight. And we've spoken about the planning harm that needs to be weighed up against any benefits that comes out of the proposal, and that's ultimately what it is. It's a balancing act. But in terms of the legislation, you do need to have special regard to any listed buildings as required by law. But it is the balancing act that is going to be the main point.
Councillor Smith, and then Councillor Wood, and then Councillor Pritchett.
So with regards to sort of the views from Beaver Cattle and the impact that the solar farms will have on those views, I understand it's going to have an impact on tourism, but if you compare that to the positive impact that this will have on the climate in the future and the steps that it will take to reverse the damage that's already been done, we have to take these baby steps, because otherwise we're not taking any steps at all. I've been on walks along these kind of back lanes and these stone paths and everything, past wind farms, solar farms, all sorts. It's never put me off going on these routes. In fact, it's nice to see them, because at least, you know, something's being done about this sorry situation we're in. I really, really think we should give it a go. Because yes, we will set a precedent, and that precedent will be for greener renewable energy, as opposed to what Councillor Wood referenced earlier, you know, the oil and the coal of years gone by. You know, that those resources aren't here forever. They're finite resources. The sun, as far as we're concerned, is going to be here forever. You know, take advantage of the situation we find ourselves in.
Councillor Smith, Councillor Wood.
Yeah, just one or two reflections, really. First of all, the idea that this sets a dangerous precedent. Earlier on, we heard that actually, if this goes ahead, then it fulfills our green obligation, and therefore that would stop other developments. Well, that's what the parish councillor said that if this goes ahead, it stops a whole series of small things happening because we've met some kind of threshold. Secondly, any kind of planning surely has to be in terms of that application and has to weigh up the positives and the negatives of that application. If we allow this to happen, that doesn't, as far as I can see, open the door to just blanket approval with absolutely everything else. I think also saying that sort of the whole vista, if you like, is unchanged and there is nothing new. When it was called Beaver, I'm presuming about 800 years ago, it was an open field system. I've just looked it up. The Enclosure Acts actually occurred in the 16th century. And therefore, it is a constantly shifting landscape. It may not be a rapidly shifting landscape, but it's a shifting landscape. And there are many people who would argue that the landscape that you're looking over into the Vale of Beaver is itself industrial. It's agriculturally industrial. It isn't a natural landscape as such, because the natural vegetation would look very, very different to what is there at the moment. So we are looking at a constantly shifting landscape. Now, I think there are issues here. I think it is a balance. In my view, I think that there is more good than harm overall. However, the one thing that I do find problematic is actually the access. And once construction is complete, how that access functions efficiently. Now, I don't know whether or not if we were to approve this, actually one of the recommendations could be around quality of access and upgrading of access to ensure that access was of high enough quality. I know that county have sort of said that the road is good enough, but I know that there have been many applications where we've disagreed with that in many different contexts. And I don't know whether that's a recommendation that could be made, but it seems to, for me personally, that if any, that is the sticking point at present.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Councillor.
Much, Chair. Thank you very much to the two previous speakers. Following on from the theme of I mentioned about a systematic review of looking at this, the Historic England report, I think it cautions against, I can't remember the exact words, I should have printed the page off. It cautions against the start of allowing this to happen, of the industrialized locations of harm, less than some harm on monuments. And one of the key things for me is in all this going forward with this and other applications is having very detailed application relevant facts and factors and opinions in the decision. And there are, for each and every application with historic churches, there are various factors. In other words, this one, if you stand on the road at the Beaver, you can only see so much of there's only so much public area, you can't see it all. If you're on site, if you're on a public footpath, you don't see much of Beaver at all. You would have to be on private land, which you're not, it's farmland now. You wouldn't choose that as a view of Beaver Castle. You would choose the road in from the A52, looking up at it. And so the canal bank is all hedges, etc. So you've got various features specific to this one. And I'm very much concerned that if we made a general decision for or against, how that would be taken forward for other applications.
Okay, any other? Councillor Illing.
Yes, the precedent scenario has troubled us often. Our mantra, if you like, I'm not sure if that's the right word, always is the merits of each application on its own. But it can't be denied that if you allowed something this large, you'd be very hard pushed to refuse another one that was a bit smaller. And when Councillor Evans spoke a few minutes ago, I found his comments very, very informative, and I felt myself swaying. And then when I heard Councillor Wood's comments, that's likewise, it doesn't get any easier to weigh this up, because we're not going to get many pats on the back from the residents of Melton Borough for doing this. But there is a bigger picture to see. It's national, it's global. I'm still undecided. I'm more inclined to not be able to support it than support it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. As regards another application and it being smaller, everything depends on where it is, and each application is judged on its own merit, as you said earlier. So that's really irrelevant. Yeah. Right. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I think probably following on from what Councillor Wood said is the big issue I have with it is where it's situated. And if it was somewhere else, you know, there's one up in in my ward at Ragdale, you're right next to a near road, you know, that makes absolute sense, and it's next to the grid infrastructure, etc. So that makes absolute sense. The other thing is, you know, solar panels aren't the be end and end all, like a lot of energy is. It's all, you know, it's evolving and it's coming through, and we have to look at what's best for it. And there's, I think Councillor Pritchard's raised a number of questions, etc. And I'm just getting the feeling that somebody's going to need to propose something at some stage with some sort of recommendation. Otherwise, we're going to go around the houses all night. And that's the way we are. But I'm not in a position yet where I'm absolutely convinced this is the right thing to do. I've been up to the site and I'm thinking it's great, you know, putting the road in and doing it all now. I can see all sorts of problems later on with it. If it was somewhere else and you're right next to the A52, etc., I'd say you'd have you'd be a good case for it around that. And the other thing with solar, compared to some of the other stuff that we use, is that we don't really know what the damage to the ground is later on, and there's all contrary reports, etc. And I don't see much of that in the report.
No.
So I'm just going to wait a few minutes and see what other people have to say
Okay,
before I
thank
make up
you.
my mind what I might
Thank you.
recommend approval. Please, Chair.
Well, I think we're going round in circles. I certainly do think we've reached that point. And I'm going to get Tom.
Thanks. Councillor Brown, I just wanted to pick up about one of the highway points, and almost a word of caution that if the highway departments, both in Leicestershire and Nottinghamshire, haven't raised any objection. Yeah, it's just a word of caution when you're making that decision and the thought process.
To make it logical, Tom, thank you for pointing out. What I'm basically saying is that, yes, policy says there's no issue, but logic in my own head says differently. That's the point I'm making.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. Just wanted to make sure that was the case.
Right, as I said earlier, Councillor Pritchard.
Few things in to do. It is on the lower lying land of the area, and that tranche of land as it runs down to Bottisford and the A52. You look at, as the officer has said, the height of the hedges, the location, and then you look at the glimpses. I think the glimpse is words that's used often in the report. You've got the road up from the A52 to Red Mile, where you see the castle. Doesn't really have much of an impact. The people on Sutton Road are screened. Sutton and going into Granby are screened. If you're in Barkston at the churchyard itself, you get a glimpse of something out of the hedge. It actually it's quite a distance from the castle. It's quite a distance from the castle. So, you know, you're on the canal towpath there and you don't see it. Now, if it was proposed to put it between Barkston Village and Church and the Beaver Castle, in that sort of triangle between the castle, Barkston Church and Redmar Church, then you are looking at more significant concerns, I think, about that. So that.
Councillor Smith.
I feel like I might just bite the bullet and propose that we approve this.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
No worries.
Right, we have had a proposal for permit, a seconder.
I'll second.
Councillor Wood. It's been proposed and it's been seconded. So we can now go to a vote. So it's been proposed to permit. So can I have a show of hands, please, of people that wish to permit? That's 4. Sorry, how many against? Any abstentions? 1 abstention.
Right, I'm abstaining because I would prefer that there was a deferment and a more detailed report against the policies in here and a conclusion. That's all I'm saying.
Chair, there's 4 votes for, 4 votes against, and 1 abstention. So the casting vote falls to you as the chair.
The power. And I would go with permit. So that means that this application tonight for the solar farm has been permitted. Thank you all for your time. It's now sort of just after 8:05. I think you'll all agree that we've had a very robust discussion and taken a lot of information in and spoken about it. So thank you all for attending tonight and have a safe journey home. Good night.